All right, hello everyone. Welcome to week 3, day 1. Today we'll talk about market equilibrium, price formation, and the importance of supply and demand, and the slope of those two curves. So we'll start with a little bit of background on the invisible hand. Adam Smith mentioned this in the Wealth of Nations. It is later formalized in supply and demand and market equilibrium. You'll hear this called neoclassical economics sometimes. And the invisible hand is just meaning that prices fluctuating according to buyer and seller action leads to no waste and is therefore efficient. And kind of a corollary of that is that doing what's best for self can also be good for others. And not just because some planner has organized or planned in this way, but through the signals and information that are available in the prices of goods. And so in markets with externalities, that would just be one example where the invisible hand is not allocating resources efficiently. And so, as I said, kind of market equilibrium is where the price balances the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. No resources are over or under provided. There's no waste at this market equilibrium point, and it happens to maximize social welfare or the well-being of producers and consumers by being the most efficient point. And so you've probably seen the surplus idea before, that market equilibrium, this point E, maximizes, which is the total of consumer and producer surplus. The consumer surplus is measuring consumer well-offness, so how well off the buyers are. And the consumer surplus is the willingness to pay, which you'll see me abbreviate WTP, minus the price that they actually do have to pay. And so any positive number there means that they were willing to pay more than they actually had to pay to get something, which is represents value to the consumer. And so you should think about that as just like an observable measure of the value that is generated from transacting with somebody else. And that's with consumer surplus, while producer surplus measures how well off the producers are. And that's how much they receive, minus how much it costs them to produce something. And so I'm going to explain surplus using this stepwise demand function, or consumer surplus, but it generalizes to any kind of functional form for demand and supply. So let's say we have Zola here, and she values seltzers for any variety of reasons. Could be any reason like relaxation, enjoyment, peer pressure, whatever. And I can characterize her entire demand as a function of this price and use that to figure out what a consumer surplus would be at a given price. So let's say that at price equals 5, Zola demands 1 case of seltzer. And then at price of 4, Zola demands 2 cases of seltzer. And with each $1 drop in the price, an additional seltzer is demanded, so that her demand curve looks like this for seltzer. And so we're going to say hypothetically that the price of seltzers in this example is $3. Let's look at just what buying that first seltzer would mean for Zola. She values it at and is willing to pay $5 for it, but she only has to pay $3 for it. So her surplus from buying that first unit is 5 minus 3 equals 2 units of surplus there. And now let's look at the second one. Well, the consumer surplus from the second case of seltzer is lower because she valued that one at $4 for that case, but she still only had to pay 3, so it's still a good deal for her. And so the surplus from buying the second case is 1. And then we can see that the total consumer surplus is the 5th case plus the 4th case's consumer surplus, or the first minus the plus the second case's consumer surplus, which is 3. Okay, now I've got a more fun example for you with dog consumer surplus. So, Sash, we're gonna need you for this one. Come on, buddy, right here. Let's say that our good is a treat, and we're gonna measure the willingness to pay and spins performed here. So here we have Sasha, our guinea pig. Sasha, will you come over here? Will you scoot? Will you scoot? Sasha, stand. Sasha, stand. Sasha, stand. Scoot. Right there. So you can see that she wants this bone right here. And I'm going to measure the price and the amount of times I make her turn around to get the bone. So we're going to measure the dog's well-offness by seeing how much she had to pay, how much she's willing to pay minus how much she actually pays and spends. And this is just analogous to the price of goods. So let's make the dog stand. Sasha, stand. Sasha, stand. Can you spin? Spin. Yes, over here. Sasha, can you go around? Yes, good dog. So you see, she ran around twice, and that's all I'm going to make her do. Let's say she was willing to do 4 spins for that treat, and the price of the treat was 2 spins, as you saw here. So the dog surplus from this is 2. Pretty simple. So supply and demand, we have this equilibrium point where they intersect. For competitive markets, might not really hold for monopoly markets, but we'll start with these competitive markets. And it just means that this is the direction that prices will go towards. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always prices, but it's sellers and buyers adjusting and negotiating the price that leads price to go towards this equilibrium point here, this equilibrium price. And so, and if let's just say that hypothetically supply would shift out from the original supply, then the equilibrium point also changes. And in this instance, the price is lower with more supply, and the quantity is higher with shift out in the supply curve for any reason. And the equilibrium would change also if the demand curve changed. So I think a really good way to kind of illustrate this point would be this clip from Trailer Park Boys, where the cops are essentially selling jail sentences to Ricky and the boys who are in this boat in the middle of a river. And they're choosing, because they can go to either side, either shore, which jail sentence they'll take. And so there's more sellers. There's cops selling jail sentences to Ricky, who's essentially buying jail sentences. And he essentially negotiates in front of each one to bring the length of the jail sentence, or essentially the price, down in this clip. And if you're interested in watching more, I suggest you see the clip, but there is a language warning on that. And so the price changes from being too high to being lower, because there's this surplus of jail and people selling jail sentences, and that surplus leads to Ricky being able to negotiate that price down, even when there's only two buyers or 2 sellers. And so in that instance, we have this P prime, the original jail sentences being offered being greater than the P star, the equilibrium price. And in general, if this P prime is greater than P star, the quantity supplied, this orange point, will be greater than the quantity demanded, because the P star is greater than, the P prime is greater than P star. And in general, quantity supplied will not equal quantity demanded if P star is not equal to that equilibrium price. And we refer to that difference between QS and QD when P prime is above P star as a surplus. There's this many goods being supplied, but only the QD goods being demanded. And so there's a surplus of QS minus QD. And the supply beyond this QS star is just waste, because no one is buying it at this point. And that leads to this downward pressure on P prime towards P star, which is this equilibrium price. And there's a number of extensions for like market equilibrium and what it can be used to do. Currently, this is data that I downloaded today from the election markets. And you can see here that the price for a share of, if Republicans win, you'd get $1, and the price for that is 40 cents. And it's been trending kind of downwards over time, which implies that people think the Republicans are going to lose. And so you have to pay a lower amount for the opportunity to win $1 if they do win. And so if you think that's too cheap, then more people will start buying Republican shares, and that'll push the price up. Another one would be like crowdsourcing information. So who wants to be a millionaire? You poll the audience. And if there's enough like non-experts in the crowd, pulling together all the information that they have will give you like the best answer. So in this case, who wants to be a millionaire? This guy got the right answer from the crowd. And then another one would be a lot of places, one being Ohio State, just allow people to walk around, and then they see where the grass is no longer there, and they build the pavement over where there's dead grass, because that's where people are walking. And It's a way to kind of efficiently build paths. And then the last thing we need to talk about, which we'll talk about more on Thursday, is how the slopes of supply and demand matter. So it's important for considering consequences and predictions about public policies. It has implications for how taxes affect the well-being of buyers and sellers and how price interventions affect the well-being of buyers and sellers. So let's talk about going to bars. There's a supply and a demand for going to bars. And in this picture right here, we have only the supply and demand that goes to directly to either the suppliers of bars or the buyers of going to bars, and no costs or benefits related to for people who aren't the ones going to bars. And so an external cost of going to bars is that you could start to transmit COVID-19 around. And so that's an external cost to people who aren't actually going to bars, but could pick up COVID from somebody else picking it up from somebody else at a bar. And so that implies that this supply curve is actually higher than a private supply curve, because it also includes a per unit social cost, which is basically the likelihood that you infect somebody else. And so the Q star prime is lower than the Q star when you take into account this external cost. And so one way we could move back towards the social cost, including Q star, is by just taxing going to a bar at the per unit social costs that going to a bar would incur. And that would be called this Pigouvian tax right here, this corrected tax. And you can see here that this tax reduces what would have been the total social welfare, which would have been everything in this triangle here, and it reduces by this kind of this parallelogram trapezoid here. But that's if demand is kind of inelastic. So if demand is more inelastic, that is, if people are less price sensitive, then you get only a smaller drop off in the quantity of bars visited and a smaller drop off in the total social welfare due to that tax. So these taxes, so those slopes of these curves have implications for how taxing them will affect the Q star. And that's pretty much all I have to say for now. In conclusion, market equilibrium is efficient, and efficiency can be achieved by just people making choices to benefit themselves, and this generalizes to a lot of different applications. So price gets adjusted in a market equilibrium by individuals negotiating over the price. If prices are higher than equilibrium price, they generally get negotiated down. And then finally, the shapes of the curves or the steepness matters for the well-offness implications of using different public policies to target quantity goals. And so that's all for today. Look forward to seeing you the next lecture for this week.